right, welcome to the Braincast, Episode 1. I'm your host, Brainmuffin, also known as Bryon Lape. This is a show where thought and education merge into fun. As part of our first episode, we're going to kind of take a trip back in time and forward in time, or to modern times, if the dogs will let us. So, I'm going to start this fully on the nerd side, and I actually had to write some things to write down, make sure I said, and go back to when I was a teenager. So if we put the Wayback Machine in about 1982 mode, is when I first saw some classmates of mine messing around on an Apple II Plus in the library, hooked to a television, and they were making this spaceship go across the screen. That's all they were working on. Still to this day, I don't know how they did it, and I don't know if anybody else remembers. But part of what back then, what you would learn on these various home computers and some personal computers was BASIC, Beginner's All-Purpose Instruction Code. So yes, the term BASIC as a programming language in all caps is an acronym. So, you know, many times when you first learned on these microcomputers back in the late 70s and early 80s, there were statements in these various types of BASIC that were common, and then there would be something that would be relevant to the hardware itself. And many times it depended on where that version of BASIC was written. Many of them, but not all, were written by Microsoft. I don't know if maybe surprisingly, whether it was the Altair or the Apple. They also had a version for the TRS-80. I think it was called Basic Level 2, if I remember correctly. And so back then, I had some friends that had computers. I had a friend that had a VIC-20. I had a friend who had a TI-994A. And when we moved to Germany, I actually encountered some people that had various types of Apples. There were Apple II Plus, Apple IIe. But we never had one. We didn't have a computer at all. The closest thing I had was I bought a used ColecoVision when I was in high school. So in 8th grade, that was 1982, when I saw some friends of mine. So early 1982, saw some classmates messing around with the computer in the library, and I'm like, I gotta figure this out. And so I went and read the book that they had. I got time to go to the library, basically finish my classwork somewhere, and some teachers would let me go to the library. There wasn't a class on it, so it wasn't like I could go to the library for an hour and just spend time there. I mean, sometimes at lunch I would go. So it was hooked to a television, and there was a cassette deck, a cassette tape player, which about yay big, mono actually, that you would hook into the Apple. So the Apple had a mic in and a line out, little mini plugs, and you plug that in, you plug it into the side of the tape, and the volume control would make a difference when playing back, so you had to find what that right volume control. Sometimes the tapes wouldn't load properly. So, and this is how I got started, and I would write my programs out. I never had a cassette for the Apple. I had a friend who had a VIC-20 that they had a cassette deck for, and I had a fancier cassette deck that actually could be controlled by the computer and stuff, and we did record some programs on those. And so in 1983, I said we moved to Germany. Uncle Sam moved us to Germany. I was an Army brat, and in my high school we had a bunch of Atari 800s, and I don't know why I was kind of like, discontent. I don't know. The Atari was kind of seen as a minor computer, even by those standards. But they did have a disk drive. And then I found out that the library had an Apple, I don't know, I think it was a II Plus, and it had a disk drive. In fact, it had 2 disk drives. And so now I had this 5¼ Wonder that was like, wow, this thing will hold like 140K of files. That was huge. And you could just put it in the drive and it would read it, and you didn't have to worry about volume control or any of that other nonsense. And it loaded a lot faster than the tape would load. And it was fantastic. So, and then we learned a lot of these were single-sided drives, but if you got a double-sided diskette, or even sometimes the single-sided diskettes would work, you'd punch a hole in the other side and flip it over, and off you would go. So I started to learn more and more about BASIC, and I started to program more, and I started to do more. And but even in 8th grade, in 9th grade even, when I was still in 83, 9th grade I did in Maryland, and then we moved to Germany. I mean, I would write out programs. The stuff would just flow out of me. I would just write them and write them and write them on paper. And I don't know whatever happened. I'm sure I have a box somewhere with all these probably thousands of lines of code that were never, never, ever typed into a computer. And actually, on some of them, I almost would do a choose your own adventure type thing, where I'd ask people, as a kid on the bus, Chuck Stockton, I'm sure I drove him nuts. You're thinking, what kind of a nerd is this guy? And I would like run through the program and ask him the questions, and then I would branch off on my paper based on what he had said, and as if I was running, I was the computer basically. You know, it was pretty silly. So I started the programming there, and you know, so here is more than 30 years later, and I start having these inklings again of wanting to find a computer, wanting to find emulators, and it kind of goes back and forth like that. So anyway, the Apple II, let's talk about the Apple II. So that was the one I programmed most in high school, because that's what I had friends who had Apples, and that's what I mostly did on. And eventually I ended up with all my diskettes were Apple II diskettes, whether they were games, whether they were utilities, whether they were my stuff, whatever, it didn't matter. So the Apple II had in ROM BASIC. And so the Apple II, the original Apple II had integer BASIC, and then by the time you get the plus and onward, the 2E, the E, the enhanced 2E, the C, the 2C, the C plus, and all that, they have Microsoft at what they called AppleSoft BASIC. So that was Apple and Microsoft came together, because integer BASIC, by its name that implies, did not do floating point. So Wozniak was not interested in floating point. He was interested in it for games. You only need integers, and they're much faster, and the games in integer BASIC are much better than they are in AppleSoft. But Jobs wanted something that people could start doing programming for, analysis of finances and things like that. Well, they needed floating point numbers, so he went to Microsoft and they got it. So in the ROM, when you first boot it up, so even without a floppy disk and DOS and all that, you could just start it, hit reset, and be at a AppleSoft prompt and actually type in commands. Now obviously you can save to the cassette, you can't save to a floppy, because the floppy drive requires DOS to be running in order to access it. So time goes on, and right nowadays, if you look on eBay, you can find full systems, and I've seen Apple IIe systems with, granted, lots and lots of bells and whistles. Floppy drives, 3.5s were eventually added into the thing. $1,200–1,300, which is a bit excessive. So, as part of a primer in our first episode of the Braincast, we're going to review some things in AppleSoft BASIC. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use an emulator. So, on my iMac, I've got an emulator. It's called Virtual 2. It's pretty good. It only does the 2 plus, and 2E. It does do an enhanced 2E. So you can do double high-res graphics on the enhanced 2E and double low-res graphics. But it does not have the capabilities of the GS. I have found other emulators for the GS, and when we get to other things, we are going to eventually get to other languages and things in the Braincast. We'll do some stuff on the GS as well. What's also really cool about the Virtual 2 is it will also do a cassette emulator. So that means I can boot it up, hit the reset on it, and have AppleSoft BASIC running and ready to do stuff without any disk images whatsoever. And then I can create a cassette image, and obviously it's actually a virtual cassette, right? Because I'm not hooking a tape deck up to my Mac in order to record. But it does run at regular speed, or at least simulated regular speed, and it can run faster. So let's take a look right now at some video capture. Let's look at some AppleSoft commands and see what we can do. All right, this is a Virtual 2 emulator. It'll do the 2 plus, and 2E depending on what ROMs you have. I have the evaluation copy, and I'll probably buy it at some point, at least in part. Let's see how well it does. So, unfortunately, this is not going to record the sounds of the device, but let's say we had just powered on an Apple II and what you had was a beep there. We're going to have to figure out how to do that better. So because I have no disks defined, as you can see down here, there's no disk, and you can open disks and things. So if this was Apple II hardware, we'd hit the reset button after we turned it on, because we don't have any floppies. And now we're in firmware mode. And to show you that the disk drive is not, there's nothing here, that we don't have any DOS, that's catalog is a command for showing the disk, what files that are on the disk, and we have none. So, but it doesn't mean we are without commands to do something, because we are, lo and behold, we are sitting in an AppleSoft BASIC interpreter. That's what that bracket prompt means. So we can do things like that. The question mark is shortcut for the print command. And there you go. So what this means is we can actually start programming right away, although we cannot save files to disk. And so as part of the Braincast #1, we are actually going to review in part this emulator as well as others, because I don't have any actual Apple II hardware. I have an Apple Mac, and that's what we're on. And so we're going to do the best we can. So here we are with floating point supporting Apple II AppleSoft BASIC, written by Microsoft, Bill Gates and company, to replace integer BASIC, which we'll also cover in other Braincasts. Integer BASIC is, because it doesn't do floating point, is very quick compared to AppleSoft BASIC, but we are dealing with a 1 megahertz 8-bit machine, so quick is a relative term in some ways, and we'll cover all that kind of stuff too. So now, because we are in, let's go over a few commands. The home command will clear the screen. It will always clear the text screen even when the text screen is not visible. So here's what I mean. So let's say we do a print A, and we have that. HGR is a high-res graphics screen, which we now see. Now if we flip over to color mode, we can type even though you cannot see it, and hopefully I do not make a syntactical error, and I can draw a line. Now if I type home and then type text, which puts it back in text mode, see, the screen is clear. Normally HDR is like this, and now not HColor, HPlot. So I draw a nice line, and you notice that it's not the color we asked it to be, and colors in high-res graphics have a bit of a nuance to them. Low-res doesn't have this issue. I don't know why it does this, but this is a Steve Wozniak Gotta Save 4 Chips special, which we'll cover as well. So let's go back to, hey, where this is the beginning. So here we are, text mode. So in BASIC, there are several commands that we can do and some things that we can do right here just to start learning. So as we saw, the print command is how we display information on the screen, no matter if it's text information or if it's a number. It could also be the result of a calculation. Okay, so, and then obviously question mark is the shortcut for that. And if we want to have a run-on series, say like that, eventually it does get cropped. So what does all that mean? Well, in BASIC, at least in AppleSoft BASIC, every line has a number, and that's how it knows when to start and when to stop. So there's no real reason to start anywhere. Most people start at 10 or 100, but it's just convention. But it is ordered by numerically, so lower line numbers come before higher line numbers. So in our little primer here, we can do this. Now remark is like so. Our mark is not printed, we'll see, and we'll say, let's say print hello, welcome to the start, and we'll put a line 100, which ends it cleanly. So what does this mean? So now the next command we have is list. With the list command, we can see what our program did. So even though on line 20 I put in a question mark, the interpreter translated that to print. And so that's why I see print. Now to start your program and make it do whatever you told it to do, it's the run command. So now I type run and enter, and we get hello, welcome to the start. Not essentially fancy or great, but it's kind of a take on the hello world. Normally you do something like this. I gotta hit the right keys. And so, and there we go. But that is a very basic, and if we want to, it's a basic program, ha ha ha. But let's say we wanted to clear the screen before we printed anything. So that is the home command, like we said before. Now when we list, look, 15 is put in line like you would expect from a numerically ordered piece. Now, what happens if we type 15 and enter? It's gone. Also means I can put something else here. Not a single quote. And again, it'll order it by the way we want, but we really want to do that. We can verify, and now when we run it, it clears the screen, prints our text out, and ends accordingly and cleanly. Now, that's great. So there we have our first little program with a remark, with a command to clear the screen, with a print command, and a proper end. What this means is also, if I had line, we shouldn't be here. So here's line 110. Well, what do you think will happen with that end command? So we run it, and sure enough, we don't get anything because of the end. But if we take that out and run it, we have it again. So the end command is the stop of a program. And it's really good. It'll come in handy later when we talk about subroutines and things like that, so that you don't accidentally get commands that are run past where you actually, on the normal execution of the program you want to run. Sometimes it's not necessary, but as we start to structure programs a little bit more, it will become more necessary. So there we have it. Here's the first look at AppleSoft BASIC on the Virtual 2 emulator with the color mode turned on so that we can see. And if this obviously was on real Apple II hardware, it would act very similarly. We have a 40-column display, and we'll cover things too on how to change to 80 columns. The 2E did support 80 columns in its later revisions, and this one does. So if I can find Apple II Plus ROMs, then maybe we'll look at what the Apple II Plus differences are. But for the most part, we're going to stick with an Apple IIe, basically what they call the Enhanced 2E, which has 128K of memory. So that is enough for this little video. Let's talk about something else. Okay, so here we have the program with the 110 line restored. And one of the things that the Apple II had the ability to do was save to cassette. And this Virtual 2 emulator does have that same ability. Now, unlike, say, Atari or Commodore that had nice cassette decks, cassette players that basically were made just for those machines and the computers could even control them, on the Apple II it was pretty much just a line in, line out mini plugs that went through to usually a cheap, realistic RCA style device, and that was pretty much it. So you know, here we have, it was just basically hit play and hit record, and you could do multiple things on a cassette, but it was very difficult to find where one program was and another program started and stopped. If you listened to it, it just sounded like a bunch of random white noise, and unless you understood what the sound that says, hey, I'm done, meant, it was very difficult. So typically you would get inexpensive, very short recordings, or say maybe 30 minutes or less if you could do a 30-minute tape, because you were wasting it otherwise. So here we want to save this program so we can load it again later. So the save command is what you use, and you do save without a file name because cassettes don't have any concept of file names. And this emulator will actually let us do it. So we're going to do save first, and then we're going to click here, I believe, make a recording. Yep, that's what we want to do. And let's just call it first hello program. And that's just for the Mac OS to know. And as you can see, down here now we have a record and feature, and it says we're done. So we don't have an error, so we're just going to assume that we're done. So we then click stop, just like we would do on a real cassette player. Basically, you would hit record on a cassette player, tell it to save, and go. So another command to clear out everything you've done is new. So if we type new, now we have nothing. See, if I do home list, there's nothing here. So to retrieve a saved program, whether it be to disk or cassette, is a load command. Now for cassette it'll look a little different. So we say load, and we put the computer into listen mode. And so now we'll click here on the cassette, and my first hello program, that's what we just did. Looks like it didn't record anything. That's very nice. Well, it means I must have been too slow. But I've also already saved this to another file. So let's see if we can restore or what's going on. Or if we have to type everything all over again and save again. So this simulator has lots of nice features, and maybe at some point we'll do a show just devoted to the simulator. I don't know. Again, I'm still evaluating it. I've got other emulators to evaluate as well. There's all kinds of neat things that I want to try and see what happens. So as you can see, this can take a while. This very small program takes a long time to load, and if you were to listen to this on a real audio cassette, it would really be an interesting sound. I actually, back in the day, listened to them sometimes, especially on my friend's VIC-20, because that's all he had was a tape recorder. So now, there it is. So let's see if we can do the save again. In fact, what we're going to do this time is we're going to do it the other way around. So we're going to eject our tape and click on the right one, make a recording on a new empty cassette tape. Okay. So I'm going to select the one we did before. Yes, I want to replace it. Now I want to save. And maybe it's a good thing that this messed up, so that way we can, but that's how you would do it. You would, basically, you'd kind of push the pause down and you do play and record usually on a tape player to get it ready. You get everything set, you'd hit the pause, because basically once you do save, it's trying to send audio out the line. So now let's try this again. So let's verify we have nothing. So let's click load and then click this and go to now we have something. And you notice that one was smaller than the other one. It's just a matter of how soon, when it's done saving, that you hit the stop. If you want to do a little bit of a no noise or something, maybe record with microphone. This is where I start. I don't know. But cassette tapes were a very inexpensive way to save your programs. They weren't very reliable, and you could have all kinds of problems. So now we'll eject our tape, and let's see if our program is back, and we can run it, and there it is. So there you go. There's a nice little save and load feature of this emulator, and it's probably about as slow as the real thing. I'm not sure what it's recording. Maybe if we can figure that out, it'd be nice. But anyway, so there we have the end of the first primer. So let's go back to the studio and get some closing thoughts, and we'll wrap up episode 1 of the Braincast. Thanks.
Welcome back to the studio. So there we have a primer on AppleSoft BASIC and some features about the Apple II line itself. We learned about the home and the text and the print and the HDR commands, the high-res graphics that were so interesting, intriguing back in the late 70s. Now by today's standards, those graphic terms aren't very high-res, but back then, my goodness, it was unbelievable. So we also learned that BASIC, at least AppleSoft BASIC, has a concept of line numbers, and that's how it knows when to do things, and it does them sequentially and numerically. Also learned that it doesn't matter when you type something in, the order you type it in, it doesn't matter, but the numbering does. So, and that's how it runs it numerically. We also learned about the in command and why it's important for it to appear in programs. Now when we get to things like subroutines and looping and other things, we'll see why we need even more importantly, why we need the in command. And we'll also learn about how AppleSoft BASIC stores programs in memory and how it executes through them. and how to take advantage of that structure to get the maximum efficiency out of your code. We also learned that even without the floppy disk, right? We had no floppy disks simulated on the emulator, but we had a cassette emulator, and we could still save to cassette files because it was emulator. But had that been actual Apple hardware with a cassette deck hooked to it, we could still save and retrieve. So we learned that the save command is how we used it to store our files and our programs on cassette, and then load will retrieve them off of cassette. And those same commands will also be used for disks, except with file names, and there's some other differences. So the Apple II was a really great line of computers back in its day. It had the longest run of any line, especially long and successful, from the Apple II all the way through the Enhanced and the Platinum IIe. The IIe outlasted all of its replacements. It outlasted the 2C, the 2C Plus, and the 2GS. Now, there wasn't two versions of the IIe. There was the regular IIe and the Enhanced IIe. Considering the E meant enhanced, you had an enhanced Apple IIe, Apple II Enhanced. Very strange. But and when it had the enhanced modes, when it picked up the double high-res graphics, and those got carried over into the GS, and then GS had other graphics routines and other graphics versions. Interestingly enough, AppleSoft BASIC was never updated to take advantage. And that emulator will do an enhanced 2E. In fact, that's what we were actually on, was an enhanced 2E. 128K of memory, if you can believe that. But because it's 8-bit, only 64K is available. But there's some other trickery to take advantage of some of that. So, there we have it. Thanks for watching the very first Braincast. Please click like and subscribe. Let us know what you thought. Let us know what other topics you'd want to cover. It's not just going to be computers, but we're going to try and make you think. We're going to teach you something and have some fun at the same time. And if you want some other types of videos, please visit Lape TV and check out some of our reviews on all the other things that we're doing. And we're trying to get even more content. We're trying to be a bit wider variety. So until next time, keep on thinking.